and welcome to Folger Encores. I'm Janet Griffin, the Folger's Director of Programming. In this Encore series, we've been enjoying sharing selections from plays, music, talks, and readings with you. This week, we're remembering the work and visits to the Folger of the remarkable Seamus Heaney. A Nobel Prize winner, Heaney read at the Folger on two occasions, in 1985 and then in 1991 for the first Folger Poetry Board reading, now a 30-year tradition. That April 1991 evening was an unusually warm one in a completely packed Church of the Reformation just across the street from the Folger. In this special reading, supported by our most dedicated friends of Folger Poetry, the honored writer offers his or her work, but also the inspiring poems of others. It's part of the joy of a long tradition of Folger presenting contemporary literature and nurturing a rich and diverse community of writers. Heaney passed away in 2013, just months before he was to return to the Folger stage. But on April 7, 2014, the evening he had been scheduled to be with us, 6 premier poets, 3 American and 3 Irish, gathered to recite his works and to celebrate his generous spirit. And at the end of this encore, you'll hear the poet Eamon Grennan remember his friend. But first we are sharing, for the first time, a video recording of Seamus Heaney in April 1991, and you'll enjoy the lyrical power of his poetry and his warm, compelling reading. And I hope you'll experience, particularly as Heaney shares his short poem at the end, how we can experience the marvelous in our everyday lives. Be sure to join us again for these weekly episodes of Encores, highlighting all the Folger has to offer. Thank you.
These are 2 poems which refer back to some extent to something that has been read before. They're 2 sonnets from a sequence called Glanmore Sonnets. Glanmore was a place where I moved to with my wife and family in 1972, and we were there for 4 years. We had a sense of isolation and verification when we were there, and associated with the slightly melancholic and elegiac moments, like when the radio close down came in the evening, listening to the shipping forecast, and then suddenly realizing that what I always loved as a kind of sprung verse poem actually was a communication to ships as well, because I used to see in Wicklow Bay trawlers on the morning after a gale warning. So this poem is set in that context, and it takes an excuse for naming all the regions of the sea around Britain and Ireland. The first lines are there, and it uses some Anglo-Saxon kennings for the sea. Then I'll just read the second poem after that. It's a poem about being a feeling of being fugitives. There's reference to the fugitive lovers Lorenzo and Jessica from Merchant of Venice, and Dermot and Grania from Irish Legend. So these are 2 sonnets from the Glanmore Sonnets. Dogger, Rockall, Malin, Irish Sea, green, swift upsurges, North Atlantic flux conjured by that strong gale warning voice collapse into a sibilant penumbra. Midnight and close down. Sirens of the tundra, of Eel Road, Seal Road, Keel Road, Whale Road, raise their wind-compounded keen behind the bays and drive the trawlers to the lee of Wicklow. L'Etoile, Le Guillemot, La Belle Hélène, nursed their bright names this morning in the bay that toil like mortar. It was marvelous and actual. I said out loud, a haven. The word deepening, clearing, like the sky elsewhere on Minch's, Cromarty, the Faroes. I dreamt we slept in a moss in Donegal, on turf banks under blankets, with our faces exposed all night in a wetting drizzle, pallid as the dripping sapling birches. Lorenzo and Jessica in a cold climate, Diarmid and Grania waiting to be found. Darkly asperged and sensed, we were laid out like breathing effigies on a raised ground. And in that dream, I dreamt, how like you this, our first night years ago in that hotel, when you came with your deliberate kiss to raise us towards the lovely and painful covenants of flesh, our separateness, the respite in our dewy, dreaming faces. Here are a couple of poems, middle-agey almost, in the sense that they are about a sense of the simplicity of disappearance. Probably the most educative thing that has happened to me in 10 years is to assist at the deathbed of my two parents. And you learn a marvel there. It's a complete change that is simple, absolute, and still remains mysterious. Anyway, these are two sonnets that I wrote after my mother's death. The first one imagines her escaping from the burdens of grandmotherdom and motherdom and wifedom. But alas, in the poem, she enters daughterdom again. She returns to the house where she grew up, which was my maternal grandparents' home, which I remember as a place of great clarity, and I describe it in the sonnet. And the second sonnet is a sense of absence again, imaged in a tree, the cutting down of a tree. The sequence is called clearances, and the governing metaphor is of when a tree is cut, that crack, it falls down, and just for a moment there's a waver in the light. The world has changed. There was fullness, now there's emptiness, but yet there's a brightness. That moment when a tree falls is a moment of devastation in one way, but it's a kind of a paradoxical moment of brightening too, or lightening. And Shakespeare uses the word lightening in Romeo and Juliet, you remember, about men on their deathbeds experiencing a lightening. And the OED gives that lightening as a rally of the spirit on the deathbed. Anyway, the absent tree is in the second sonnet. So these are two sonnets from the clearances sequence in memory of her Margaret Kathleen Heaney. Polished linoleum shone there, brass taps shone. The china cups were very white and big, an unchipped set with sugar bowl and jug. The kettle whistled. Sandwich and tea scone were present and correct. In case it run, the butter must be kept out of the sun. And don't be dropping crumbs. Don't tilt your chair. Don't reach. Don't point. Don't make noise when you stir. It is number 5, New Row, Land of the Dead, where grandfather is rising from his place with spectacles pushed back on a clean, bald head to welcome a bewildered, homing daughter before she even knocks. What's this? What's this? And they sit down in the shining room together. I thought of walking round and round a space, utterly empty, utterly a source, where the decked chestnut lost its place in our front hedge above the wallflowers. The white chips jumped and scouted high. I heard the hatchet's differentiated, accurate cut, the crack, the sigh and collapse of what luxuriated through the shock tips and wreckage of it all. Deep planted and long gone, my coeval chestnut from a jam jar in a hole, its heft and hush become a bright nowhere, a soul ramifying and forever silent, beyond silence listened for. I just end up with 2 poems from a book which is appearing this year. It's called Seeing Things. It's obviously meant to have two possibilities in that title: just seeing things and then envisioning things. And the first thing I read is from the title poem. It's in three bits, but I'll just read one bit of that. And then the second bit, I'll just read it at the end without anything in between. The second bit is a little short thing of 12 lines. And if I were to give it a title, it doesn't have a title, but if I were to give it a title, I would have to call it A Ship of Life, to answer our ship of death at the end. Then we began with an Anglo-Saxon funeral boat, and we end with a Celtic dream vision boat. And I like to think of this vision as an emblem of what the imaginative arts can do. They can live in their own element and delight us, and they can have communion with our element as the story tells. The story is from the Annals of Ulster. But I have to say that I greatly appreciate your attention and stillness, and I appreciate the heat, because I feel it here myself. School's out after this, as I say. This is the third section of Seeing Things. It begins with a boat journey, and it ends as a second part in it. And then this section is a memory from just the verges of memory of my father. He is described as undrowned. He didn't actually drown, but he almost drowned. And that moment that describes it here, and then this other one. Thank you. Once upon a time, my undrowned father walked into our yard. He had gone to spray potatoes in a field on the riverbank and wouldn't bring me with him. This is a kind of a Frostian plain speak. Once upon a time, my undrowned father walked into our yard. He had gone to spray potatoes on the riverbank and wouldn't bring me with him. The horse sprayer was too big and newfangled. Bluestone might burn me in the eyes. The horse was fresh. I might scare the horse, and so on. I threw stones at a bird on the shed roof, as much for the clatter of the stones as anything. But when he came back, I was inside the house and saw him out the window, strange without his hat, his step unguided, his ghosthood imminent. When he was turning on the riverbank, the horse had rusted and reared up and pitched cart and sprayer and everything off balance, so the whole rig went over into a deep whirlpool. Hoofs, chains, shafts, cartwheels, barrel and tackle, all tumbling off the world. And the hat already merrily swept along the quieter reaches. That afternoon, I saw him face to face. He came to me with his damp footprints out of the river. And there was nothing between us there that might not still be, happily, ever after. This is a little ship. The annals say, when the monks of Clonmacnoise were all at prayers inside the oratory, a ship appeared above them in the air. The anchor dragged along so deep behind, it hooked itself into the altar rails. And then, as the big hull rocked to a standstill, a crewman shinned and grappled down the rope and struggled to release it, but in vain. This man cannot bear our life here and will drown, the abbot said, unless we help him. So they did. The freed ship sailed, and the man climbed back out of the marvelous as he had known it. Thank you very much.
The occasion is Seamus's legacy, a literary legacy. And I think even from having heard the ambassador and Joe Hassett and Frank Bedard and Jane Hirschfield, we know what that is. It's that a poet of the stature and completeness of Seamus, the arc of whose own career, abbreviated as it had to be, is so full that it only beggars our understanding in a certain way. I don't think since Yeats has a poet managed, certainly an Irish poet, managed to compose an arc of a reflective and responsible career, if I can use that word, and it's a fair word here in the sense of movement as well as the profession. Seamus's legacy is in the bloodstream for us. I mean, speak for myself, I couldn't have written in the same way, it seems to me, although we're of an age, or just about, or where, without the model of his commitment, his dedication, and his seriousness. And of course, everything, as we've talked about, his joy, his lightness of touch, and his management of balancing between extraordinarily difficult opposites all the time. The doubleness of Seamus was there. His generosity, Jane has just mentioned his generosity a couple of times, and that's absolutely true. Our great translation of the Beowulf is Seamus's. And years and years ago, I met Seamus for a pint in Ballsbridge in Dublin. I was there, and I said, we were seated at the bar, elbows on, and what are you working on? And he said, well, the Norton have asked me to do Beowulf. I said, mighty. Have you got started? Well, I'm nearly started, he said. And I said, what about what? The first word. And Seamus just kind of leaned over the bar, put his fist up, and he said, so. and that's the great translation, the first word of the Beowulf, which was a great way. So here we are, and doing what we have to do. And as the ambassador said, it's a bittersweet occasion, obviously, but fair enough. Seamus knew what bittersweet was. I'm going to read, as I say, a translation. It's in Human Chain, and it's from Columkill, from Derry, and the poem is called Columkille Keckenit, if that's the pronunciation in Latin, and but it's of Irish poems written probably in the 11th, 12th century, and it's small little poems that were attributed to Columkill. The first one in Irish is Ski Machrub on Skriben, which means my fist, in certain ways, my hand is tired from writing. And this is Seamus's version. My hand is cramped from penwork. My quill has a tapered point. Its bird mouth issues a blue-dark beetle sparkle of ink. Wisdom keeps welling in streams from my fine-drawn, sallow hand. River run on the vellum of ink from green-skinned holly. My small runny pen keeps going through books, through thick and thin, to enrich the scholar's holdings, penwork that cramps my hand. And I feel, that's a self-portrait in its own way of the poet in the very sort of energy of his career. The second little translation is a four-liner. Is Ara Charim Dire is the Irish, and he translates it as Derry, I cherish ever. It is calm, it is clear. Crowds of white angels on their rounds at every corner. And the third little quatrain is Phil Sulnglas. It's a very famous poem by Columkill, who is the patron saint of exile and homesickness. And the thing is, Seamus gives us the first line. Towards Ireland, a grey eye will look back but not see ever again the men of Ireland or her women